Hey guys, it's Miss Fearing here. Today we're going to go ahead and look at Unit 6 Notes 5, which is going to talk about compound interest. So we went through and we talked about our exponential growth and our exponential decay equations the other week. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at a compound interest. And this one is very, very similar to that growth equation that we had because of this plus sign here. We've seen that. But the difference is we have this n now. We're dividing by an n here, and we're timesing by an n up here. So that's going to be new for us. So let's go ahead and talk about what all these different things mean. A is your ending amount. That's usually what we're trying to get to. We don't know this usually. The question's always asking, where will I be after this much time? So that's the thing we're usually trying to find. P is our starting amount, which we used to see as our C value. But it got P from the word principal. So principal is our starting amount, and that's going to be our P value. R is still our interest rate, and just like before, if it was given to us with a percent sign, we have to turn that into a decimal. Our R value always has to be a decimal. N, this is our new one right here. N is our number of times compounded per year. And you are always going to find this after the word compounded. So when we start looking at these, we're going to figure out what our N value is because it comes after the word compounded. And then T is still our number of years. So there's a couple things we need to know to find the value of N. Remember, again, we're trying to look for that word that comes after the word compounded to figure out what our N value is. And to do that, we have to think about what does that word mean and how many times a year would I get it if it says that. So if I see the word daily, I want to know how many times in a year would I get this, or would I pay this, or get paid this if I got it daily? Well, we know that there's 365 days in a year, so I know that my N value would be 365. If you saw compounded weekly, how many weeks are in a year? So we would go ahead and we would get that 52 times. If you see monthly, think to yourself, how many months are there in a year? There are 12. Quarterly, that's one that we don't always think about. But when you think about how many quarters are in a whole, we go ahead and we know that there's 4. Semi-annually means that I get it twice every year. And then annually is just once per year. So these values of N are going to be really important. That's the only new thing that we're going to look at today. So let's go ahead and look at this first example here. We have Maria's parents who invested $14,000 at 6% per year, compounded monthly. How much money will there be after 10 years? So we want to find all of these different values. We need to know a P value, we need to know an R value, we need to know an N value, and we need to know a T value so that we can plug them all into our equation. And I'm going to write the equation over here, P times 1 plus R over N, all to the N times T. Don't forget that N is in 2 different places here. So P is my principal, my starting amount. Well, I am starting with $14,000. My rate, remember, is going to be turned into a decimal. So right now it's 6%. So the decimal's at the end. We got to move it twice to make it a decimal. So it's going to be 0.06. My N, how many times I'm getting it in a year. So I'm going to look for the word that comes after compounded. So here's compounded right here. The word that comes after it is monthly. So when I see monthly, my N value is going to be 12. You can look back at that table and see when we saw monthly, it was 12. And then T is your number of years. Well, this asks for 10 years. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to plug these numbers now into our equation. So we have A equals P times 1 plus my rate divided by my N, all to my N times my T. So you have to do one step first before we can go ahead and plug this into our calculator. Our calculator doesn't like to do the exponents when there's 2 things up there, so we have to create our exponent as one thing. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the 12 times the 10 first. So when I do 12 times 10 in my calculator, or you can do it in your head if you can do it, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get 120. So I'm going to rewrite everything except my exponent is now going to become 120. Now from here, you can plug this all straight into your calculator just like you see it. 14,000 parenthesis 1 plus 0.06 divided by 12 parenthesis. Don't forget you need your caret key right there to make that an exponent, and then type in 120. And when I get that, I get A equals 25,471.5542. So now this is asking us for money. So when we talk about money, we round to the 2 decimal places afterwards. So if I do that, I'm going to get $25,471.55. So let's go ahead and look at number 2 now here. We need to determine the amount of an investment of $300 is invested at an interest rate of 3.5% compounded semi-annually for 22 years. So again, we're going to find the things we need. We need a P value, we need an R value, we need an N, and we need a T before we can plug it into our equation of A equals P times 1 plus R over N all to the N times T power. So P again is my principal, my starting amount. Well, I'm starting with $300 this time. R is my rate, and I want that as a decimal. It is a decimal, but it has the percent sign with it, so it's not just straight decimal like we want. We need to turn it into one. So we're going to move it over twice. I'm going to get 0.035. N is how many times it's compounded, so I want to look for the word that comes after compounded. Here's compounded, so the word after it tells me my N, so semi-annually. Look at your table, tells me I get it twice a year. And then T is how many years. I'm going 22 years. So I'm going to plug that in. I'm going to get A equals 300 times 1 plus my rate divided by my N all to my N times T power. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the powers first, multiply those together first. So I'm going to get A equals 300 times 1 plus 0.035 divided by 2, all to the 44th power. And now I'm going to plug that into my calculator just like I see it. So once I plug it in, I got A equals $643.6790. And again, since we're talking about money, I had $643. We're going to round this. So since this is a 9, we need to round the 1 up. So it's going to be 68 cents. So we're going to go ahead and look at example number 3. We're going to do this last one together, and then I'm going to have you try 4 on your own. So make sure that you are really following along and focusing on what it is that we are trying to do here. So I have an allowance of $190 that got 11% compounded monthly for 1.5 years. I want to know what it's worth after 1.5 years. So I'm going to figure out my P, my R, my N, and my T. P is my principal, my starting amount. I started with $190. R is my rate as a decimal. Right now it's a percent, so we're going to move it twice. So moving it twice gives me 0.11. N is how much it's compounded, so I look for the word that comes after compounded, which tells me monthly. Look at that list. Monthly tells you N is 12. And T is how many years have gone by, so I'm looking at 1.5 years. So I'm going to plug that into the formula. A equals P times 1 plus my rate divided by my N, all to the N times the T power. So I'm going to do my exponent first, my 12 times my 1.5. I end up getting 190 times 1 plus 0.11 divided by 12, all to the 18. Now plug that straight into your calculator. You get A equals 223.916320. And since we're talking about money, we want to round it to the first 2 decimals. So since this is bigger than 1, we're going to round that up. So we're going to $223.92. So here's our last example for today. I want you to pause the video, try this problem on your own, including plugging it into the calculator, making sure that you're doing that correctly because that's the hardest part, and then come back and check your answers with me before moving on to the practice. So when I did this, I got $374,604. My P was my starting amount. R was my rate. Make sure you turn that into a decimal. We don't want it as a percent. I found out that I was compounded weekly, and weekly told me that N was 52. And I was looking for 16 years, so my T would have been 16. So if you didn't get that same answer, please come talk to me before moving on to your practice for today.